Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood. In this episode, I'm joined by the wonderful Grace Marshall, author of 3.5 books. You'll find out more about the 0.5 as we go through. Productivity expert, productivity ninja, coach, speaker on all things. How do we be the best of ourselves? How do we work in the best possible way? And we particularly focus on some of the advice from her book, Struggle, the surprising truth, beauty, and opportunity hidden in life's shittier moments. And this is also a warning here that this is the podcast that I have said the word shit most in, so there is some swearing involved, all for good reason. I do hope you enjoy this conversation. I know I did. Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I am very excited today to be joined by the wonderful Grace Marshall. And we're going to have a conversation about the joy through the struggle. And I'm really interested in how we take this idea and to think that it's not just all the great things that happen, but actually the joy in the process, the joy in the stuff that maybe is a bit hard, a bit icky, and a bit sticky. So rather than me introduce Grace, I'm going to hand over to you. Grace, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do. Oh, I feel a bit like Cilla Black there. And kind of how you got to where you are today. What was your career that led you to your current world?
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for having me, Beth. So I'm Grace Marshall. I am head coach, chief encourager, and productivity ninja. I clearly can't just settle on one job title. I have
No.
three. So what I do is that I help people find ways of doing their best work. So sometimes I work with people one-to-one as a coach. Sometimes I speak at conferences, away days, team events, things like that. And I do a lot of workshops working with groups as well. And as well as that, I write books. So I've written 3 books and we'll talk about those later. But how I got here in a really, really roundabout way. Life story. I was born in Leeds. Parents are from Hong Kong, so I am the proud daughter of immigrants. I grew up between the two countries. We moved around a lot. My dad got itchy feet, so I'm very well versed in starting new schools. Yes, moved around a lot. So I was your typical straight A student. Typically quite good at turning my hand to most academic subjects. Really shit at PE. I was tiny and clumsy, still am. So I kind of grew up in that sort of space, I guess. And I went to university in Bath. You can tell I'm northern when I say Bath rather than Bath.
Yeah, the Leeds is coming in there.
That's it. And I graduated with a degree in international management and modern languages. So it was the kind of degree that would prep and prime you really to climb the corporate ladder. So most of my cohort went on to get jobs with big banks and energy companies and consultancies and your sort of top Fortune 100, those kind of companies. I ended up getting a job in a tiny startup in the energy space. So it turned out to be one of the best career moves I ever made because I very quickly realized I was in the wrong job.
You see, this is the thing. People think the wrong job is the wrong career move, but it teaches you something, right? You learn something through every single one.
Exactly. It's funny because I was probably drawn to, I worked in marketing. I was the marketing executive. There was one other person in the department, and that was marketing director who would make all the decisions. Then it was up to me to make everything happen. And I think the thing that drew me to marketing was that I'm a people person. But it turns out that at least that job, was all about numbers. And being someone who is naturally a people pleaser and with that kind of straight A student history, there was a part of me that just really, really wanted to do it well.
Yeah.
I write about in Struggle in my latest book how if I'd have been in a large company, I probably would have just been shuffled from one department to another, doing just about well enough to not be culled, but still kind of going, oh, not sure about this. And my confidence would have been ebbed away. And So that's why I'm actually really grateful that I was in such a tiny environment that it became really clear really quickly. Okay, I can try really hard at doing this, but actually there's something stopping me from doing my best here. What is it? And it was that kind of questioning that led me to a coaching session. Actually, it was my first introduction to coaching, and instead of being told how to do my job better, I was asked questions that I hadn't been asked since I was a teenager, doing a lot of navel gazing and sort of thinking like, what gets the best out of you, and who are you, and those kind of things. And long story short, it led to my midlife crisis in my mid-20s.
Okay, and you're ahead of the game, like a trailblazer.
I'm impatient. That's always been my driver for getting anything done, is impatience. So I ended up quitting my job. We also decided at the same time to start a family.
Helpful,
yeah. when the first baby came along, it was like it was a double whammy. It was a proper identity crisis for me. So I was like, who am I? What am I doing here? But over time, it gave me that opportunity to redefine and rebuild and relearn. What does success look like for me? What do I actually want to do with my life? What do I enjoy doing? And it wasn't a big epiphany that went, I know, I'm going to do this.
There was no like, this is it moment. They rarely actually happen.
It was more like a treasure hunt in hindsight. So in hindsight, it was a treasure hunt. It was looking for clues and going, okay, here's what I do next, and here's what I do next. In the moment, it felt just a lot of like just trying to figure it out and make it up as I go along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get to places in their career where they feel like that. It's like, I don't know what to do, and I'm making it up and it's not all working, and
yeah, exactly. So, picture this. I'm kind of, I think after a while, I tried a few different things out, and then I ended up going back to coaching. And it was a friend actually who said, hey, you keep raving on about coaching. Why don't you look into that as a career? Because, I know you're a really good listener. You love listening to people. Look into it. And I was like, no, I haven't got some, 25-year experience in some high-flying career so that I can impart advice onto other people. But I did look into it. And then, of course, I found out that's exactly what coaching is not about. It's not about being the expert and telling other people what to do. It's about helping other people to be the expert in their lives. And that really, really appealed to me.
I love that. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that all the assumptions we make when we're thinking about our careers. So there's assumptions about, this kind of degree should lead you to this kind of company, and this kind of role should be good because you like this. And then we're like, actually, this isn't the version of what I want. And I have to make some steps on that. And those steps are weird and feel a bit icky and a bit sticky. But actually, through working through those things, I can work out what I don't like, what I do like, and move towards something that is more suited to me.
Absolutely. Because if you'd have told that kind of tiny, I was actually really introverted as I was really shy. The child, the schoolgirl in me, if you'd have told her that I would be speaking for a living, you should be like, you've got the wrong person.
Let's run for the hills, shall we?
Those career. Did you ever do those career questionnaires where you've got a pencil, you've got to you fill in these boxes and answer this question, and it tells you what you should be.
Yeah.
That told me I should be a librarian.
Mine told me I should be a nurse, and I was like, okay, I was rubbish at science. You were probably good at it. I was rubbish at science. You were the straight A's. There was no A's involved in any kind of science for me. And I was like, okay, I don't like science. And apparently it came back that you ticked you wouldn't mind working shift work, therefore it comes up with nurse. And I was like, and that was the first time that I was like, oh, right, I'm 17. I'm not going to believe everything people tell me anymore.
Oh, what a good lesson.
Such a good lesson.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like these careers. And also, I think when we look at the last 20 years, the amount of different jobs that are available, that are coming into the world right now, versus what was available when I was a teenager thinking about life in the future. I mean, one of the things I love about interviewing is people have jobs that I didn't even know existed. And I'm like, wow, isn't that amazing? How many different opportunities there are. But it comes back to this point where actually sometimes careers are a bit like, you know when you have a go to a restaurant and there's a menu and there's too many things on there and you can't choose?
Oh yeah.
That I
I want
think
to
is one
order
of the
everything.
challenges of careers right now. It's like, actually, maybe we used to be able to pick between a meat and a fish and a vegetarian. Now we have 27 meats,
Yeah.
47 vegetarians, and some vegan and some dairy-free alternatives. There's so many different options,
Yeah,
and we don't
and
even know what's
you've
out
got
there.
things on the menu you don't recognise at all. You'll have them to Google it and go, "What is that?"
Like, what is that? So yeah, I totally get it. So you are now in the zone of your world of. I love the way that you're saying it. The introverted girl would be like, "What? You do what? You do speaking for a living?" So speaking, facilitating conversations, teamwork, etc., and your coaching side of things. And
Mm,
you've written 3 books.
yes.
I'm so impressed you've got to 3 books. It's amazing. Tell us a little bit about your books.
So, first book was called 21 Ways to Manage the Stuff That Sucks Up Your Time. So, it's a
Oh,
very long title for a very small book. It was affectionately, so I wrote this, back in the time of growing a business alongside growing a family.
yeah.
So, it was very much the kind of book. In fact, a lot of the reviews on Amazon said this is the perfect book for people who don't have time to read a time management book.
That's one of the challenges, isn't it? Here are 27 different things in time management that will take you 20 hours each. Like, yeah, that's probably not
Exactly.
going to work.
Right. Nobody wants that. And one of my good friends affectionately called it a toilet book. So the kind of book that you could pick up and read for a couple of minutes if you're on the loo. But clearly not
Said
just
with
limited
love,
to
I'm
being on
sure.
the loo. I know, right? So that was my first book, and that's actually what got me into speaking, because I wrote this book and then went, "Oh, how do you promote a book? Oh, you have to go and
Mm.
do some speaking and talk about it." So that's my intro into speaking. And then the same year that that book was written, Graham Olcott wrote the book How to Be a Productivity Ninja.
Mm.
And we got chatting. We actually met on Twitter, of all places. And
Love
we got
that.
chatting and found that we had a really similar approach to productivity. So both of us are actually naturally disorganized. We don't see it as you have to be like this. It's more, here's a kit bag, here's a toolkit, here's a way of thinking about things that can help to organize stuff so that you can be creative and free flowing within that and still, and be able to produce and get the impact that you want. So we had a really similar approach. And so we ended up meeting up for coffee. And and it turns out that while I was doing the one-to-one coaching, his company did a lot of the sort of group and organizational training workshops. And he said, "Look, we're looking for someone to be our productivity ninja in the Midlands. Would you fancy joining the team?" So I did, and officially I was a Midlands-based productivity ninja. But I ended up, I've gone as far north now as Helsinki, and as far south as Budapest, and as far west as Texas. So we're a little bit loose on geography.
Yeah, it's no longer about the geography. It's about the being the ninja in it.
Yeah,
And
exactly. And it's
it's
about relationships, really. So you end up developing relationships with different companies, and they go, "Oh, actually, that's great that you worked with our team here. Could you work with our team there as well?" So
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that Twitter has been used for good in this particular
Yes.
situation, because Twitter is not always used for good. And
No.
it's so funny. You're just reminding me that when I was in my last employed job, my lovely boss bought me the Productivity Ninja book, and she gave it to me
Oh.
as a thank you for doing some helping her with a prep for a speech she was doing.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Oh, it's so lovely." And she said, "I don't want you to think, like, just don't think that I don't think you're very productive. I just thought you'd really like the book."
Yeah.
And I was like,
Exactly.
"Oh, okay." Because I was like, "Is there a side message here?"
Yeah.
Because I am actually a bit like you, one of the world's naturally disorganized people. But
Mm.
I've had to be able to kind of work well, to be able to run my business, to be able to be successful. I've had to put in like little mechanisms and things that work to
Mm.
make me feel more productive, to make me get stuff done
Yeah.
when I am the person that's not very organized and attracted to the shiny new thing.
Yes, I can totally relate to that. So bringing it back to your original question, see, I will go off on tangents.
Oh yeah, come back. We'll
So
come back in.
so that was the first book. Second book was written in 2015, and it's called How to Be Really Productive. And that came about through an introduction to Pearson, the large publishing company. And they basically got in touch saying, "Hey, Grace, would you write us a book on brilliant productivity as part of our Brilliant series?" And I thought, okay, I'll put together a proposal. I said, if I was to write a book called Brilliant Productivity, here's the stuff I would put in it. And they came back and said, this is all really good, but this is actually more than what we would put in our brilliant series. So could we give you 2 book contracts? Could you write the book that you want to write, and we'll find another title for it? And then could you then like distill it down into the bits that we would put into our series book? So basically, Brilliant Productivity is kind of like book 2.5. Because it's like a cut down version of How to Be Really Productive. So I don't tend to count that when I say I've written 3 books. But sometimes occasionally somebody will look on like Amazon and go, hang on, Grace, you've written 4 books. I'm like, well, kind of. So that's book number 2 and 2.5. And then book number 3 came out in 2021. And it is called Struggle, the Surprising Truth, Beauty and Opportunity Hidden in Life's Shittier Moments.
It's such a great title. Such a great book. And there is, and the interesting thing here is, like, we're going to get into it, is when I talk about WorkJoy and when you talk about struggle, is that they're not 2 separate different things. They're actually sometimes like, how do we work through the stuff that's hard to get to the stuff that's good? Or even with the stuff that's hard, what's the joy and the beauty in the stuff that is hard or horrible or real life stuff that we can't control? So I'm so interested in this one. I think we're going to dive into this concept a little bit more. So before we go into it, I'd love to know what spurred you to write this book, because obviously your first few things are kind of like about productivity and like you're in your world there, and then this one is like, oh, hang on a minute, we're talking about struggle and the difficult stuff. Where did it come from?
So the idea came to me in 2018, and I thought at the time it's probably going to be a bit of a niche topic. If you go back to those days this was the days of Brexit and the days of Trump, and there was already a lot of stuff going on in the world that created maybe some anxiety, some adversity, some uncertainty. And the reason why I started looking into it is because often in the world of productivity, the narrative is often one of optimization. It's like, how do we set ourselves up for success? And there's some really good stuff there, but as a side effect, we almost see struggle as the opposite of being productive. So in the coaching conversations I was having, people will come to me saying, okay, Grace, I've got these things in place. I'm feeling productive. I'm, getting my inbox to 0. I've got my second brain up and running. I'm getting stuff done, but I'm still struggling. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
And the more we started talking about it, the more I thought, hang on, this isn't just the opposite of being productive. Sometimes what we're struggling with is actually the birthplace of some of our best work. And sometimes just because you're struggling doesn't mean that you're in the wrong place. In fact, it can sometimes be the signal to say you're in absolutely the right place. And if we don't know that, if we think that struggle means something's gone horribly wrong or there's something wrong with me, what we will do is when we hit struggle, we end up kind of either hunkering down and almost going into like a fight mode, or we end up avoiding it and thinking, this is a trap, this is the wrong place to be, get out. Or we end up, and I call this like the fight, flight, and freeze. So fight is like, I'm just going to hunker down and fight my way through it. Flight is the avoidance and the procrastination. But freeze often doesn't look like nothing's happening. It can look a lot like busyness. So I don't know if you've ever had that situation where you're working on something and you're like, this is hard. I feel like I'm waiting in treacle, and God, look at my to-do list. Look at my inbox. There's so much else I could be getting on with. I'm not feeling productive here. Do you know what? I'm going to deal with those emails. I'm going to do those quick wins, because then I can tick things off and I can feel productive, rather than feel like I'm just like wading through treacle.
Yes, and very much yes on these 3 things. So, and also in kind of the world of WorkJoy, these are all the things that people experience there. It's like I'm just going to go in and like fight, or I'm going to quiet quit rather than actually understand what's going on here when I've got some gloom, or I'm just going to leave this job without sorting out any of the problems that I have going on for me, and I'm going to go to a new job because it's all shiny and new and everything will be perfect, and then getting there and going, oh, it's not perfect here either, because this is still the real world we live in. We haven't gone to the fantasy world of work. And the freeze one, I'm giggling internally right now, because yes, definitely. And like the dopamine hit of getting something off your list rather than sitting there working on something that's a bit tricky and sticky is something that I have often found myself doing,
Mm.
as including things like tidying out a drawer and doing pretty much anything that doesn't make you do the thing that you really need to do.
Exactly. And there's something about you. If fundamentally you think, if fundamentally we think that struggle is the opposite of being productive, then every time we hit struggle, we think, I'm not being productive. I need to do something else.
Mm,
But if we think, no, that might not be the case. What if struggle isn't that battle to fight or that trap to avoid? Maybe this is not an interruption to my work. Maybe this is the work. Maybe this is a
yeah.
sign that because I'm waiting treacle, actually, this is where I'm stretching. This is where I'm doing something new. This is the work that's worth doing. Then I can tell myself, I don't need to get out of here. This is where I need to be. This is the right place. Okay, I can now stay here. I talk about being in a tunnel when we're in struggle, that we often talk about seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But what if instead we shine a light in the middle of the tunnel?
Yes. Ooh, like get
Yeah.
a little bit of a roof window or something going on, and shine some light
Yeah.
and see what's really in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And that means, like, I don't need to get out of this tunnel or get away from this as quickly as possible. I can stay in the tunnel. I can turn a light on. I can go, right, what am I actually dealing with here? Maybe the tunnel is where the work is. So it's almost like, rather than trying to get away from it, I'm going to go, okay, roll my sleeves up. This is a shitty moment, but there is good stuff going on here, and I'm going to learn to pay attention and see what this is, the thing I'm dealing with, but also see what maybe it isn't, see what
Mm,
else it could be. And that way we kind of activate a different way of thinking and a different way of seeing things, a different way of interpreting our thoughts, our feelings, and then that will lead to a different response.
yeah, so rather than I'm going to run out of here or get to the end of the tunnel as quick as I possibly can, or ignore the fact that there's a tunnel at all, I'm just going to pretend it's not here.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my head torch on. I'm going to have a look around. I'm going to learn some stuff. I'm
Mm.
going to grow through it. I'm going to understand what it is that's making it feel like it's difficult. I'm going to actually sit
Mm.
with that, because that's the thing, isn't it? Sitting with that icky feeling
Yeah.
is hard.
Yeah.
But if you can work through it, when you then move through the tunnel, maybe not even to the end of the tunnel, you're like, oh, I've learned something through that process, and I've got something in my toolkit that I can use next time I'm in a tunnel, and then next time I'm, you keep growing that skill
Mm.
and that understanding of what struggle can give you, versus thinking about the struggle and not being in it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, and by doing that, what we're doing is biologically, we're accessing our whole brain. So, when we hit fight and flight or freeze, that's what's happening in our head, is that we're going into that, what I call the lizard brain. So,
Yeah.
or it's also known as the chimp brain. So that primitive part of the brain that's responsible for keeping you alive. And it's super, it keeps you alive by accessing that fight and flight stress response, which is super useful if we're in a genuinely life-threatening situation, because it's
Yeah.
diverting energy towards your muscles so that you can run. It's narrowing your focus to, what's the weak spot in my enemy, or where's my escape route. But if what we need to do is, actually, there's no life threat here, but there's some stuff to explore, then we need to access the part of our brain that allows us to see more than just enemy and good and black, good, sort of black and white and good and evil and stuff like that. We almost need to widen our perspective, and that's when I talk about sort of inviting curiosity as like the antidote to fear. Because
Yeah.
then that way we can bring back the rest of our human brain back online, and it's our human brain that's so much better at curiosity and discovery and compassion and relationship building, and all the good stuff that we do as human beings.
Mm. And it's so interesting, because I'm sure lots of people are sitting here thinking, yeah, if you get into that fight, flight, freeze zone, nobody ever does any particularly good or creative thinking when you're in that zone, because your brain is physically not capable of it, because the blood is
Exactly.
going somewhere else, right? It's the
Yes.
oxygen in the blood is literally physiologically going somewhere else.
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
not in the bits of your brain that go, I know I can find a solution to this, or this tricky relationship. What we need to do is have a conversation. It goes, what we need to do is run and escape and hide. Please, thank you, bye.
I know. When I talk about lizard brain, I'm like, in everyday work life, how it comes out is more like email rage, like road rage, but
Yes.
with email.
Ah! You're like there, and you're like typing furiously. It's like, okay, actually, should we just stop that for a moment and think about what's really going on here?
Yeah.
But it feels quite good in the moment, right? To like type something, but it doesn't really work.
Exactly.
I love this idea that actually, if we can switch on our curiosity, if we can think about discovery, if we can think about the words that allow us to work through something, and if we can do it with that, I love the idea of compassion here, and
Mm.
compassion for ourselves, I think, as well, not just for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because so one of the things I talk about in the book is I call it my 3 shits process for navigating struggle. And the first one is, oh shit. It's that
Yeah, yeah.
recognition. Yeah. Just recognizing and allowing yourself to feel, to notice the feeling, to not feel like you have to do something about it straight away, but actually just recognize, this hurts or this is hard. And that in itself is practicing that self-compassion.
I love that.
Mm.
And oh shit, I love that.
Yeah.
Talk us through the other 2 as well. I'd love to know like the 3 shits process. I think it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the first is oh shit, because if we don't acknowledge our own feelings, what we do is we try to jump straight from problem to resolution. And when we
Yeah.
do that, we can end up recreating what I call our toilet roll moment. The toilet roll moment at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's like, we were basically, what was going on there was we were going, okay, there's stuff I can't control here. I feel like I need to do something. So do you know what? I can make sure we don't run out of toilet paper. Like that I can do. I can't control the decisions that the government makes or my child's school makes or my employer makes, but I can control our stock of toilet paper, which, just has absolutely nothing to do with this kind of virus.
Yeah.
But that's what happens if we don't allow ourselves to kind of just go, okay, oh shit. So that's why that's the first one. The second is, what is this shit? And that's when we activate curiosity in the face of fear. It's where we start to ask questions. It's where we start to explore, to go, okay, what does this look like? What is it? But what else could it be? What also, what isn't it? Because the
Yeah.
thing about that fight and flight instinct is we're very good at adding stories and meanings. And so, when we're in fight and flight, our stories and meanings are basically ways of categorizing into good and bad, who's my friend, who's my enemy, what's safe, what's dangerous. So it's that kind of like very much black and white thinking. Whereas, what we need in that sort of curiosity space is to go, well, okay, what other perspectives, what other possibilities? It's like widening that space. And so sometimes even just asking, like, what's the story I'm telling myself about this?
Yeah. And I do think, and I know I've done this, and I know many other people will probably relate to this, when we're in that what is this shit moment, if we haven't really explored it, there is a tendency for some of us in life to over dramatize what the shit actually is.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, everything shit.
Yes.
Everything in my life is shit. My work shit. My home life is shit. I hate my house. I hate my clothes. I hate everybody.
Yeah.
Versus
Because
hang on a minute. There's this one little thing that's shit.
Exactly. There's a part of our brain that loves everything to be neat and tidy. So it's like, okay, if we're in the shit, then everything has to be shit. And,
Yes.
and it's almost like there's some sort of misery comfort in that. But like you say, that's not always the case. And so what is this shit is about inviting us to look and see between the nooks and the crannies, to be able to see the color in between, and maybe sometimes to see both the good stuff and the shit stuff together. And sometimes what we can find is that we end up seeing possibility. So it's like, okay, the sort of, this is a roadblock. That's true. I can't do what I wanted to do because that's blocked. But maybe that will then invite me to explore some of the lesser known paths. One of the things I often talk about is, like, in the world of innovation, we very rarely we talk about wanting to innovate, but we very rarely want to disrupt the things that are going well. And even if something isn't going very well, but it's still working, our brains are lazy. We want to kind of just, do you know what? It's just easier to keep doing it.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's not until that conventional way is shut that we become open to the unconventional, that we go, okay, that thing that feels a bit risky, I'm not sure about, and I might get wrong, and it might work, it might not. Do you know what? If the current way is completely shut, then that gives me full permission to go and
Yes.
experiment and go and do
Yeah.
that. And we saw a lot of that, I think, in the beginning of the pandemic.
We did, yeah. Like people actually, well, if I can't do this, let's try other
Mm.
things. Which all of those other things were available to you pre-pandemic.
Yes.
They were all there. They were all
But
there.
like with that disruption, sometimes we get that permission to do things imperfectly,
Yeah.
and I think that's a really good opportunity there. So it's, what is this shit is about spotting and learning to see things differently, and learning to see those opportunities, to see the sort of surprising things about that
Mm,
situation. And then when we do that, what will then naturally come, and it doesn't always come straight away. Sometimes it takes a while, sometimes it's quick, but it will lead to the third shit, which I call holy shit.
the revelation.
Exactly. The revelation, the truth, the beauty, the opportunity. And that's kind of like what I call the treasure, basically. So when we think of treasure, we often think of, maybe a treasure on display in a palace, in a hall, in a museum, where it's all been polished and the lighting is good and the air is clean. But we often forget that where we keep it is not where we found it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, treasure is often found in the dirt, in the caves, hidden, lost, forged in fires. And and so when we realize that, we can then start to recalibrate our radar. And we can start to realize, actually, when we're in the shitty moments, okay, yes, it is shit, but maybe there's also some treasure to be found here. And I think it's
Yeah.
really important to not kind of go, oh, are you saying that everything has a silver lining and everything is a blessing in disguise? No.
No. Some
Yeah,
things are just shit, right?
yeah,
So sometimes when you do what is this shit, you're like, yes, actually, that is a big steaming pile of shit.
exactly. Yeah. And I think it's learning to go, there is shit and there can be treasure, rather than, the treasure is the shit in disguise. It's the sort of duality of the two things. And I think it's similar when you talk about joy. It's like, joy doesn't mean the absence of gloom. It's like there can
No.
be both things at the same time. And that's the beauty of the human experience, is that we can experience what feels like contradictory emotions and experiences in the same space.
Yeah, two or more things can be true at exactly the same time. We can be
Exactly.
feeling both a sense of work gloom and a work joy. We can be feeling both a sense of it being shit and it being amazingly productive. All of
Mm.
these things are actually possible and are happening all the time.
Yeah.
And I really like the idea of actually, in the shit there might be treasure, in the shit there might be shit, but we can actually think of them as both of those things. And it just reminds me of a friend who always does the whole, you can't polish a turd situation. But then what she says to me is, but you can throw glitter all over it.
Yeah.
It's like there is always something you can do. And I love the idea that we don't have to think about these treasures as being
Mm.
all these shiny, nice things, beautifully lit, lovely places, etc. That we actually find them in those caves or those dimly lit places, in the tunnels where we're struggling. That's where we find some of those
Mm.
bits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was just in conversation the other day, and a story I was reminded of was from Pixar, when they were talking about the film Inside Out.
Oh, I love that film.
Oh, such a good film.
Yeah.
And they sort of, in the whole development of that film, they went through loads and loads of different emotions, going which ones, which ones, which ones. And it wasn't until they landed on sadness that they went, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one. That's actually the emotion of empathy.
Mm,
And
yeah.
and I've heard this story so many times now when I've been doing talks on struggle, is people will share. I had one the other day, someone said, I was with my team on like an away day when I got a news of bereavement, and that was a really shitty day for me. But one of the things that really stood out to me in that day was how my team rallied around me.
Yeah.
And that relationship, that's that moment, it doesn't make the bereavement go away, but there is something really beautiful in that, and that is definitely a moment of treasure. And there
Yeah.
is something in that struggle that does provide that connection, I guess, for us to bond. and to connect to each other. One of the things I write about in Struggle is what makes me weak maybe makes us strong. That, when I can't do everything myself and cope with everything, and but actually that is a space for other people to reach in, and for me to be surprised by someone else's support, or there's someone
Yeah.
else's. There's something about that human connection that happens in those spaces of icky, sticky, tricky, as you put it.
Yeah. And I think, there are so many examples of this. I'm thinking like, so, someone's bereaved and the way the family or the kind of work family gather around and support and make that happen. But equally, if you've ever been in a team when the kind of shit has hit the fan
Mm.
and you do that, like, we are all working on this together, we are going to get through it, we make it happen, you go to extremes that and you achieve things, and you
Mm.
achieve a level of productivity you've never achieved before, because there's like a
Mm.
really tight deadline, and it feels like, oh, but equally it feels like, oh wow, look at what we can actually do.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
something really powerful. I agree with like the human connection, and I think sometimes at work we forget that the human connection still exists at work, because organizations are just made of people. Like, organizations themselves don't actually exist. Without people, organizations
Yes.
don't exist.
Organizations are entirely made up.
Yes. I actually wrote that in my book, that organizations are a figment of our imaginations. They are not actual things. So when people say to me things like, my organization is rubbish, I'm like, well, can you actually define who it is in your organization? Because your organization isn't a thinking being. It has no
Mm.
sentient emotions,
Yeah.
but the people within it do. So let's talk
Mm.
about them and not the organization. And I think that's, in that moment, thinking about sadness, thinking about the struggle, thinking about how do we get through that, is this
Mm.
idea of doing it together and finding ways and connection to make that happen.
Mm.
And that actually requires us as individuals to go, hello, I need a bit of help with my shit, please, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Rather than, like, I'm struggling, I should hide this.
Yeah, just hide this shit and see if anybody notices
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, look, this pile of shit has become bigger
Yes,
because
exactly.
I haven't dealt with it.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
definitely going to get the winning podcast amount of times we said the word shit.
I know.
Definitely.
That's it. Yeah, you might, in your introduction, you might want to just give a little,
A little swear
um,
warning.
parental advisory.
There is on that, I kind of think it does come onto this, and it's because basically I'm going to serve my own purpose here. Is when I was reading your book, there was one sentence that for me just like it was like, oh yeah, and so many amazing things in this book, but this was one that came out so much so that I have highlighted it, circled it, and put a post-it note in the page where it's at. And the title of this page is Not Always Pretty, and it talks about self-care, and it's a chapter on when we're spent, and I think this is when often many of us feel struggle. And it at the bottom of it says, rest is terrifying. And I'm like, I agree with that statement more than you can possibly imagine. I find it utterly terrifying. I don't know how to do it. I was never taught to do it, and I live with someone who's so bloody brilliant at it, they don't know how they do it. So tell me a little bit about how rest fits into struggle, and how we might get past it being utterly terrifying. Please help me, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and the reason why I wrote that is because so often we, like, rest gets this sort of branding of being like, oh, it's beautiful, it's all like spa days and bubble baths, and it's like, no, because if we think that's what rest looks like, that's when we end up beating ourselves up and going, well, I don't feel that, or it does, or when I stop and I'm full of cold, or actually, I stopped and did nothing today and I felt really shit. What,
Yeah.
I must be doing it wrong. But one of the reasons why rest is terrifying is because when we stop and rest, that's when everything else catches up with us.
Mm.
And for those of us especially who have survived by keeping going,
Hello.
yes, we've survived the tiger, the imaginary tiger running after us, but then maybe the stuff that catches up with us are things like, that conversation. Yeah, I didn't like who I was in that conversation.
Mm.
I didn't like how I did that. It's those kind of it's the emotional processing, and I think we often forget that in work. We think about the sort of practical and the tactical, the strategic, and but the kind of work we do these days. There's a brilliant quote by Minu Shafiq, who used to be the deputy governor of the Bank of England, I think. I may have got that wrong, but she's now currently the director of London School of Economics. And she
Oh,
says,
yeah.
in the past, jobs were about muscles. In the present, they're about the brain. In the future, they'll be about the heart.
Oh,
Yeah. And, if we think about, so my work and productivity, in the past, it would be about efficiency. It would be about on a factory line, how do we get people cranking out as many widgets as possible in the time that they're at
yeah.
the conveyor belt? Whereas now it's about attention management, because it's like, what's the quality of our thinking? Because we're working with our brains. But actually, in the future, they're going to be about the heart. It's going to be about our emotions, our relationships, and an emotional processing takes a lot longer. It's harder. It's more intensive than mental processing.
Mm.
So the amount of emotions we deal with at work, and then often we go, oh no, we've got to be professional, so we don't talk about emotions. We just
We'll
get
just
on with the
ignore all
job.
the things that are going on inside of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why often when we do stop, all of those then come kind of crashing in after us, and sort of and catch up with us. And sometimes those are difficult things to face.
Mm.
But there's also often a lot of really useful information there.
Yeah.
So some of those things, we were talking at the beginning about career choices. Sometimes it's like it's only until we stop and go, actually, it's not just that I hate this job, it's I hate who I am when I'm doing this job, the way I'm
Yeah.
doing this job. I hate who I'm becoming. And that's quite a intense thing to sort of wrestle with and wrangle with.
Yeah.
And so often it's far easier in the moment to go, "Do you know what? I don't want to think about that. I'm too busy to think about that. I've got other stuff to do."
Yeah.
And it's
And
only when
also,
we
when you
start.
do the
Yeah.
I hate my job, you
Mm.
can do so it's my boss, it's the job, it's everything else that's the
Mm.
problem. When you do the I hate who I am in my job, it's like, oh, I've got to do the work on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But and you and I both know, like, when we allow ourselves to face up to it, we realize, first of all, it's not a tiger, it's not going to eat us. Yeah, we're not going to die. So we can stand down those fight and flight instincts. But also, sometimes it'll tell us something really profound and really useful about ourselves, where we go, this is the thing I'm learning about myself.
Mm.
And then I can take that learning forwards, and I could put
Yeah.
it to good use. Because if I hadn't done that, I would still be trying to work this very numbers-based marketing job and pretend and force myself to be good at it.
It's like,
I
I
wouldn't.
will get an A rating for
Yes.
doing this job, even if I hate every second of it and I hate every part of my being while I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I'm actually I found out I was really shit at mind reading, because I was just trying to figure out what other people wanted of me, and kind of go, oh, here you go. Is it this? Is it this? And I'm really shit at that. But one thing I'm really good at is connecting.
Yeah.
And having conversations. So one of the things I really enjoy about my work is that I get to have different conversations with different people in different organizations, and I can kind of connect the dots together, and a new conversation comes out. That's how all my books come. It's from something I'm hearing over here, and kind of linking it to something over there. And if you look at that in certain contexts, it would look a lot like being distracted, not being focused,
Yeah.
um, being too all over the place. But actually, in this context, it's a superpower.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting if we come back to kind of this idea of like productivity, etc. is I am massively brilliant at doing things for a deadline. Like if
Mm.
there's a deadline, not one I've set myself. If I set myself, excuses galore. If there's a deadline set by somebody else, I will make it happen. But often I don't make it happen till near the deadline. And I used to think that this was a personality flaw in me, that I was very
Mm.
lastminute.com. But what I have realized and what I have worked on personally in my own productivity is I haven't been ignoring that. I have been allowing my brain to think about it on a kind of like low level track for however long I've been working on this particular thing. And I've been collecting information and collecting research and collecting all these little bits and allowing my brain to join it all together so that when I actually do the thing that needs to be done, like a report or some whatever it is I need to be done, I need to write something, I need to talk about something, I need to do something with it.
Mm.
It's better than it would have been if I'd have just tried to do it straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of creativity comes from that. It comes from giving space rather than
Mm,
forcing. And, you know, I'd kind of talk about it almost like you know, like a hot air balloon. So, you know, in a hot air balloon works because there is air, and air in itself is like nothing. Like, you know, if you squeeze it out, then that, you know, that balloon's not going to rise. But equally, if you don't have a canvas over the air, you're not harnessing that air. So there's
yeah.
something about that kind of, you know, allowing space, but then putting some canvassing around it so that you can harness the energy that comes from that.
I love that analogy. I'm going to keep that one in my mind about what's actually going on for me. Like I've given it some canvas, giving it some air,
Mm,
and then it will become something that flies. I love that. That's
yeah.
great. Oh, yeah, brilliant. Um, this has been so interesting, but I think we're going to have to while our way into our quick fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
Right. Question number one. For you personally, what is always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
Conversation
Mm.
every single time. Oh, am I allowed to go into more detail, or is it just quick
Yeah,
fire?
do it, do it. Like, I want to know. I want to know.
Yeah, I was just to bring it back to what we were just talking about. I used to think that, you know, given what I do, like, you know, I work in that sort of thought leadership space. You know, people hire me to be the expert and to deliver something. You know, and so sometimes when people go, "Oh, you know, can you design something for us, Grace?" I think, oh, I've got to go away, figure it all out, and then bring it back to them and go, ta-da! Here's the, you know, here's the pinnacle
Mm,
of perfection. I've made it for you, and that's like a really hard way for me to work. And I realized that actually conversation is how I work best. So what if, you know, part of the way that I work isn't that I go away and produce something beautiful and bring it back to you, is that actually we work in partnership. So, you know,
yeah,
if you want something curated and created for you, that we work together and in conversation where we bounce ideas off each other, or you tell me what's going on and I pick things out and I play it back to you, and then we kind of curate this thing together. And what we end up with is something that is really well tailored to that, you know, the needs and the challenges and the people. But also, what we end up with is a process that I absolutely love, because I'm
yeah.
like,
Like,
that
there's
that
joy in the
wasn't hard.
process.
That was like, I love that. That was really
Yeah,
easy. And it created something really beneficial as well. So it's that whole like idea of like your strengths are the things that strengthen you.
yeah.
Conversation is always guaranteed to bring me word joy.
I love that. And I have noticed a lot in my tracking of my world is days where I don't have any conversation are the days when I am least creative, least productive, and
Mm,
least happy.
yeah, yeah, same.
So love that one. Next question. What book are you currently reading?
I've just finished Black Box Thinking by Matthew
Oh,
Syed.
love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, loads of kind of you know, loads of connections actually to the work on struggle around
Mm,
how we struggle with failure and mistakes, and how there's so much good learning in that.
yeah. But you have to actually allow it
Yeah.
and not just ignore it. Yeah. You can't ignore the shit. The shit is
No,
there. You
you
will tread
have
on
to
it
stay
one
in the
day.
tunnel to learn from it.
Brilliant. What is the best or most useful bit of advice that somebody has given you in your life that you always find yourself coming back to?
Oh. I remember somebody saying to me ages ago, when I first started my business, look into, not up to, people that you admire.
Ooh.
So rather than putting people on a pedestal to go, oh, they're so amazing, I wish I was more like them, it's like, no, 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 let's learn. So look into, and so you then kind of go, okay, what is it about this person that appeals to me? And that way you're learning about yourself as well as about them. And then on a practical basis, it might be, okay, so they've got to a place that I want to? How did they get there? What are some of their habits and their actions? And so it's like learning from and looking into rather than up to. I find it's such a sort of healthy place of growth rather than a place of comparison and sort of perfectionism and people pleasing and all of that kind of stuff.
It's a bloody brilliant bit of advice. It
Mm.
really is, because when we do that looking up to and we think, oh, they're amazing, we often think, I'm thinking in relation to struggle, they haven't struggled to do it. Look how amazingly they've done it.
Yeah.
Because we see the outer version of everyone else and not the inner struggle, do we, of how people get places. But if you look into them for what's inspiring, what do they do? How do they do it? Yeah, I love that bit of advice. I'm totally going to take that one. And then what is your one super practical bit of advice for our listeners, that's something that they could go to now, tomorrow, the next day, that you think would help them get some work joy, and why?
Oh, I've got to choose one. This is like the big menu that we were talking about.
If you've got more than one, I'm not particularly a rule-based person. If it comes to, I'm fine.
Okay. The one I'm going to choose for today is to write yourself a ta-da list. So we often write ourselves to-do lists, things we need to do, but ta-da is ta-da, this is what I have done, or this is what's gone well. It could be your win for the week. It could be like, this is the thing I really enjoyed. So one of the sort of practical things I often talk to people about is having a habit of review. So the way that I do that is having a weekly review, and some of it's really practical, like go through my action box and my emails to go, who do I need to get back to, and look through my to-do list and prioritize and reschedule, and really practical stuff. But one of the things I enjoy most about it is right at the end I do a little bit of journaling, and the first thing I start with is my ta-das.
And in my head, the ta-das are filled with jazz hands as well.
Yeah.
Ta-da! I am we're not on video, but I am literally doing jazz hands when I think about a ta-da list. And I suppose what it takes away from, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I definitely have, confession time, is when you get to the end of the week and you're looking at your to-do list, and I add things onto the to-do list and then tick them off immediately to remind myself that I've done them and feel good about the fact that I've done them. But actually a ta-da list would take away the need for doing that, because you're like, oh, I did this and I did that.
Yeah, exactly. And it just helps to rebalance, because sometimes our brains have this kind of negativity bias, and that comes from the survival instinct, because it's like, if you ate something that made you ill, back in the sort of foraging days, then you want to remember that so that you don't eat that thing again. So that's why we have this negativity bias. But that means that sometimes in our day-to-day we forget about the good things. So ta-da means we're balancing that out. We're deliberately focusing on what went well, what was good, what have we done. That then gives us that dopamine hit of going, yay, I did a thing. But it also gives us those clues. It helps us to do that treasure hunting in reverse, to go, oh, hang on a minute, the last few weeks, all my ta-das were conversations. That's interesting. And then we can take that learning forwards.
Love it. So we're hunting for treasure and using jazz hands. And with that, I am like so happy. So where can people find more about you and your work?
So gracemarshall.com is the best place and the easiest place to go. That's where you can find out about the kind of work that I do, who I work with. You can join me in conversation. So my newsletter is always just a bit of like insight or encouragement, work-life encouragement, basically, that can land in your inbox on an occasional basis. It won't be super regular. It won't be, because remember, I'm naturally disorganized, but it will be just that little dose of encouragement that often, I'm told, arrives at exactly the right time. I don't know how I do that,
a little bit
but it happens. But also you can download the first chapter, or a complimentary chapter basically, of books 2 and 3, so Struggle and How to Be Really Productive. Brilliant. All of that is on the website, so that's the best place to find me.
And we'll pop that in the link into the show notes so people can go straight to it. Grace, it's been wonderful talking to you today. Thank you so much. I'm going to go and write a ta-da list as my next action. It's been great, and I am really enjoying Struggle as well, so I really recommend it as a good book to read.
Oh, I've loved this conversation. Thanks so much, Beth.
Well, a huge thank you to Grace for coming on to the WorkJoy Jam and talking to us about her career journey about her books, about some advice, such wonderful things that I think we can take from there. I did like her final bit of advice around the to-da list with the jazz hands. That's the bit that I've added, that I think is a really great idea to help us reflect, review, understand where we're getting our joy from. I think there's a great synergy there of how we can think about joy. I also think there's something here, isn't there, about they are not separate things. Like, our struggle isn't separate to our joy. Our struggle can be where we find some joy. We could be feeling joy and struggle all at the same time, in some of those shittier moments, in the real life stuff, in the crises, in the moments of terror. We can actually really find some great connections with other humans. We can find some things about us. We can find out some things about how we do things. And there's some learning and some growth and some opportunity within all of those areas. And I really like the idea of like searching for that treasure. And sometimes we can only see that treasure when we look back at it. We don't always see it immediately. But I'm sure that if we were all to take a moment to look back through some of our shittier moments, we will definitely find pieces of treasure that we have taken with us along the way. So a huge thank you to Grace for joining me. Do remember there are plenty of WorkJoy Jam podcast episodes out there, different people, different perspectives. Do go and have a little look and pick and mix the ones that really appeal to you. We also have our wonderful community club, WorkJoy. It is a group of people who are all aiming to get more joy in their working lives. We have guest speakers and regular connection networking sessions. Would love to see you there. And of course, WorkJoy, A Toolkit for a Better Working Life. The book is available right now from all good booksellers online. I do hope that if you read it, you enjoy it. And I would love you, if you are listening to this podcast and enjoying it, to rate and review as well, because that really helps it get into the hands and the ears of the people who might need it. Have a great rest of your day.